62-year-old cowboy Jake Morrison had worked with horses his entire life. He'd trained them, healed them, understood their language better than most people understood human words. But nothing in his 45 years of experience prepared him for what happened when he found an injured, wild Mustang stallion on his Nevada ranch. The horse was bleeding, clearly in pain, and should have been terrified of human approach. Instead, what this wild animal did next, the deliberate, impossible action it took despite its injuries, left Jake frozen in disbelief. Because this wasn't instinct. This wasn't survival behavior. This was a conscious choice that would lead to the discovery of something no one expected. Something that would prove wild horses possess intelligence far beyond what science has documented. What happened in the next 60 seconds would change everything Jake thought he knew about these magnificent animals. Subscribe now for incredible true stories of animal intelligence that will leave you speechless. The August sun was brutal in the high desert of northern Nevada, and Jake Morrison was checking his fence lines when he spotted the horse. Even from a distance, Jake could tell something was wrong. The Mustang stallion was standing in an unnatural position near Jake's water tank. Head down, weight favoring 3 legs, body language screaming distress. Jake had 47 horses on his 3,000-acre ranch, a mix of domestic animals he trained and worked with, and the occasional wild Mustang that wandered in from Bureau of Land Management land that bordered his property. He'd always respected the wild herds, admired their spirit, and maintained a careful boundary between wild and domestic. But this stallion was in trouble. Jake approached slowly, speaking in low, calm tones that had soothed countless frightened horses over his decades of work. "Easy there, boy. Let me see what's wrong." The stallion was magnificent, a dark dappled gray with black mane and tail, probably 8 or 9 years old, in prime condition except for the obvious injury. As Jake got closer, he could see the wound clearly. The horse's right front leg had a deep laceration, probably from barbed wire, and blood was still flowing. The wound was fresh, maybe an hour old, and needed immediate treatment. What struck Jake as unusual was the stallion's reaction to his approach. Wild Mustangs fled from humans. That was their nature, their survival instinct. Yet this stallion held his ground. Not aggressive, not submissive, just waiting, watching Jake with dark, intelligent eyes that seemed to be assessing, calculating, deciding. "You know you need help, don't you?" Jake said softly, now just 20 feet away. He pulled out his phone to call his veterinarian, but the stallion did something that made Jake pause. The horse took several steps toward Jake, not away, toward, then stopped and looked back over his shoulder toward the distant hills. Then the stallion looked at Jake again, took another step forward, and whinnied. Not a sound of pain or fear, but something that sounded almost urgent, communicative. Jake had seen horses try to lead people before. Domestic horses, trained horses, horses that had learned humans could help, but never a wild stallion, never an animal that should have been terrified of human presence. The stallion repeated the behavior. Step toward Jake, look back at the hills, whinny, look at Jake. The pattern was deliberate, unmistakable. "You want me to follow you," Jake said aloud, his voice filled with disbelief. "You're injured and bleeding, and you want me to follow you somewhere." The stallion's ears pricked forward at Jake's words, and the horse took another step closer. Close enough now that Jake could have reached out and touched him, close enough that Jake could see the pain in those eyes, but also the determination, the intelligence. Jake made a decision that defied his training and his decades of experience. "All right, show me." Jake grabbed his emergency veterinary kit from his truck, along with water and his satellite phone. His ranch was remote enough that cell service was unreliable. Then he did something that went against every rule about wild horses. He approached the injured stallion with deliberate intent to treat the wound. The stallion stood perfectly still, trembling slightly from pain, but not moving away as Jake examined the leg. The laceration was deep, cutting through skin and muscle, but miraculously had missed major blood vessels. It needed stitches, needed antibiotics, needed professional veterinary care. "I can stop the bleeding temporarily," Jake said, more to himself than the horse. "But you need proper treatment. We need to get you to my barn." But the moment Jake tried to guide the stallion toward his ranch buildings, the horse resisted. Not with aggression, but with clear refusal. Instead, the stallion pulled gently in the opposite direction, toward the hills, toward wherever he had come from. Jake applied a pressure bandage to slow the bleeding, administering a quick injection of antibiotics from his emergency kit. The stallion tolerated the treatment with remarkable patience for a wild animal, but the moment Jake finished, the horse began moving away from the ranch, toward the wilderness, and then the stallion stopped, looked back, and whinnied. The same pattern. "Follow me." "You're injured and losing blood," Jake said. "Whatever you want to show me, it can wait." The stallion made a sound Jake had never heard before. A combination of whinny and rumble that sounded frustrated, almost human in its urgency. Then the horse did something that left Jake absolutely stunned. The stallion walked back to Jake, reached out with his muzzle, and deliberately grabbed Jake's shirt sleeve in his teeth, not biting, not aggressive, but pulling, tugging Jake in the direction of the hills. A wild stallion was physically trying to lead a human somewhere. Jake felt chills run down his spine. This wasn't random behavior. This wasn't instinct. This was conscious, deliberate communication from an animal that had no evolutionary reason to trust humans, let alone seek their help. "All right," Jake said quietly. "I'm coming. But we're going slow, and if you collapse, I'm calling for help immediately." The journey took 45 minutes. The stallion moved at a careful pace, clearly in pain, but driven by something stronger than his injury. He led Jake across rough terrain, through arroyos and up rocky hills, constantly checking to make sure Jake was following. Several times, Jake tried to stop and rest, both for the horse's sake and his own 62-year-old body, but the stallion would not allow extended delays. Finally, they reached the base of a steep cliff face. Jake knew this area. It was part of the vast wilderness that bordered his ranch, rarely visited by humans. The stallion stopped at what appeared to be a narrow ravine, cutting into the cliff face, and whinnied loudly. And from deep within the ravine came an answering sound. Not a horse. Something else. Something that made Jake's blood run cold. A child. Crying. Jake rushed into the ravine, his heart pounding. The space was narrow and dark, carved by centuries of water erosion. About 30 feet in, partially hidden by fallen rocks, was a small boy. He couldn't have been more than 7 years old, wearing hiking clothes that were torn and dirty. The child was conscious but clearly injured, his leg bent at an unnatural angle. Hey, it's okay. I'm here to help," Jake said, kneeling beside the boy. "What's your name, son?" "Michael," the boy gasped through tears. "My leg, I fell. I've been here since yesterday." Yesterday. This child had been trapped here for over 24 hours, and somehow, impossibly, a wild Mustang stallion had found him, had understood he needed help, and had deliberately sought out a human to bring back. Jake did a quick assessment. The boy had a broken leg, was dehydrated, and showing early signs of shock, but was otherwise stable. Jake immediately called for emergency services on his satellite phone, giving precise GPS coordinates. "How did you find me?" Michael asked weakly. Jake looked back toward the ravine entrance, where the injured stallion was still standing, watching. "A horse brought me. A wild horse." "The gray one?" Michael's eyes widened. "He was here earlier. He kept coming to check on me. I thought I was seeing things because I was thirsty, but he kept coming back. He would stand at the entrance and call out, like he was trying to get someone's attention." Jake felt tears forming in his eyes. The stallion had found this child, had recognized he was in distress, and had made the conscious decision to seek human help, and not just any human. The stallion had gone to the nearest human habitation, had approached Jake despite the injury and despite instinctive fear, and had physically led him back. "You're going to be okay, Michael. Help is coming. That horse, he saved your life." The rescue took 3 hours. A helicopter couldn't land in the terrain, so it was a ground rescue with stretchers and technical equipment. Throughout the entire operation, the wild stallion remained nearby, watching. When paramedics tried to shoo him away, fearing he might be dangerous, Jake intervened. "Leave him be. He's the one who found the boy. He's the reason we're here." As Michael was being carried out on the stretcher, the boy called out weakly, "Thank you, horse. Thank you." The stallion's ears pricked forward, and he took several steps closer, close enough that Michael could reach out and touch the horse's muzzle. The wild stallion stood perfectly still for that brief contact, then stepped back as the rescue team continued their work. The story made national news within 24 hours. Wild Mustang leads Cowboy to rescue missing child. Michael's parents, who had reported him missing after he wandered away from a family hiking trip, were overwhelmed with gratitude. The boy had fallen into the ravine, broken his leg, and had been unable to climb out or be heard by search parties that had been looking in the wrong area. But for Jake, the media attention was secondary key to what he'd witnessed about animal intelligence. He contacted Dr. Rebecca Hayes, an animal behaviorist from the University of Nevada who specialized in wild horse cognition. Dr. Hayes drove out to Jake's ranch the next day, accompanied by a wildlife veterinarian named Dr. Marcus Thompson. Together, they tracked the stallion, who hadn't gone far, staying in the hills near Jake's property. "I need to treat that leg properly," Dr. Thompson said, examining the stallion from a distance through binoculars. "The field bandage Jake applied probably saved him from bleeding out, but that wound needs proper cleaning and stitches." The challenge was approaching a wild horse for medical treatment, but Jake had an idea. "Let me try." He walked toward where the stallion was grazing, speaking softly, carrying his veterinary kit. The stallion watched his approach, ears forward, alert but not fleeing. And when Jake reached him, the magnificent wild horse stood still and allowed Jake to remove the bloody bandage, clean the wound, administer local anesthetic, and stitch the laceration closed. Dr. Hayes filmed the entire interaction, tears streaming down her face. "This is unprecedented," she whispered. "He's allowing treatment from a human. He understands that Jake is helping." Over the following week, Jake treated the stallion's wound daily, and each time, the horse allowed it. Dr. Hayes conducted observational studies, documenting behavior that challenged everything scientists thought they knew about wild horse cognition. "What we're seeing suggests several extraordinary things," Dr. Hayes explained during a presentation at the university. "First, this stallion recognized a human child as a creature in distress, despite never having encountered human children before. Second, he made the cognitive leap that humans could provide help that he couldn't. Third, he problem-solved how to communicate this to a human, using physical contact, spatial leading, and repeated patterns. And fourth, he understood that accepting human medical treatment for his own injury was necessary. This level of interspecies empathy, problem-solving, and complex reasoning is remarkable." Michael recovered fully from his ordeal, though he would carry a slight limp from the broken leg for the rest of his life. His family visited Jake's ranch 2 months after the rescue, bringing the boy to see the place where his life had been saved. The stallion, whom Jake had quietly named Sentinel, though he never called him that aloud, was grazing in the hills visible from Jake's property. Michael asked if they could see the horse, and Jake, with Dr. Hayes' blessing, led the family on a careful hike to where the herd ranged. Sentinel was with his band now, several mares and foals, reclaiming his position as lead stallion. His leg had healed completely, leaving only a scar as evidence of his injury. When Michael called out, "Thank you, horse," The stallion raised his head, looked directly at the boy, and released a soft whinny before returning to his herd. "He remembers," Dr. Hayes said softly. "He absolutely remembers." Jake returned to his routine on the ranch, but everything had changed. The story had sparked international interest in wild horse intelligence. Funding was secured for long-term studies of wild Mustang cognition. Policy discussions began about wild horse management and protection. But for Jake, the impact was more personal. He had spent 45 years working with horses, believing he understood them. Sentinel had taught him that there was still so much more to learn, that these animals possessed depths of intelligence and emotion that science was only beginning to understand. 6 months after the rescue, Jake was checking his fence lines when he saw Sentinel approaching from the hills. The stallion came close, closer than a wild horse should ever approach, and stood at Jake's fence line. The two regarded each other in silence, and then Sentinel did something that brought tears to Jake's eyes. The horse lowered his head and touched his muzzle to Jake's outstretched hand, a gesture of acknowledgement, of connection, of something that transcended wild and domestic. Then Sentinel turned and galloped back to his herd, free and wild, carrying with him the proof that love, intelligence, and compassion exist in all creatures, regardless of whether they've ever been taught such things by humans. Jake stood at his fence for a long time after the stallion disappeared, his hand still extended, feeling the ghost of that touch. He thought about Michael, safe at home with his family. He thought about Sentinel, healed and free. And he thought about the moment that had frozen him in disbelief, when a wild animal had grabbed his sleeve and pulled, asking for help in the only way he knew how. "Thank you," Jake whispered to the empty landscape. "Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for teaching me that there's still wonder in this world. Still mysteries, still proof that the bonds between species can be stronger than fear or instinct." The sun was setting over the Nevada desert, painting the hills in gold and crimson. Somewhere out there, a wild stallion was leading his herd to safety, his healed leg carrying him across the land he knew so well. And on a ranch at the edge of wilderness, an old cowboy who thought he'd seen everything stood in wonder, having witnessed a miracle that would change how the world viewed wild horses forever. Sentinel continues to lead his herd in the Nevada wilderness and is now under protection as part of a wild horse research project. Michael, now 9 years old, has developed a passion for animal welfare and hopes to become a veterinarian. Jake Morrison has become an advocate for wild horse conservation and works with Dr. Rebecca Hayes on ongoing cognition studies. The case of Sentinel has been published in multiple scientific journals and has influenced policy discussions about wild horse management across the western United States. Dr. Hayes reports that Sentinel's herd has been observed showing unusually tolerant behavior around humans, suggesting that learned behavior can spread through wild horse populations. If this incredible true story of animal intelligence, a child's rescue, and a cowboy's discovery moved you, subscribe for more extraordinary animal stories. Hit that like button, share this video to spread awareness about wild horse cognition, and tell us in the comments, do you believe wild animals can understand when humans need help and consciously seek assistance? Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the wildest hearts possess the deepest wisdom. Sometimes animals understand more than we give them credit for, and sometimes a creature we think we know can surprise us in the most extraordinary ways.